Hello and welcome to Understanding Drawing. Drawing is an incredibly important skill for a visual artist to have. Drawing can also be very tricky to understand or acquire though. One of the reasons for that is that drawing isn't actually one skill. Drawing is responsible for many different facets of an image, and it's also made up of many tiny little smaller skills that need to come together. As a beginner, it's very easy to miss the context or to miss the smaller skills. We may not really draw boundaries between those and think of drawing as this one bigger lump, which makes it harder to train. Or we may really disregard the importance of drawing because we just see it in a particular context. For instance, when I was starting out, I was looking at drawing in the way that a painter might. So I was only looking at drawings as really block-ins, at something that will be very quickly covered by value afterwards, by tone, or by color. So I was looking at drawing as the end result. I was looking at what does it give me? What is it responsible for in the final product? And with a painter's way of drawing, for instance, drawing can be quite tricky to spot, because if all we need are these straight lines, these block-ins, these flat shapes that we're going to fill up with color, then what's the point of spending a long time on those? This then poses the next problem, that drawing isn't really just an end result. It isn't just about lines, it isn't about what it gives us. Drawing ultimately becomes a way of thinking. We use drawing to think a certain way about things, to construct the objects in our scenes. We also use drawing to create the space in our scenes, the perspective. It's responsible for every single structure that is within your image, making sure that your character fits together properly, that the proportions, that the anatomy, that the designer working, these are all essentially in the realm of drawing. And so that's why drawing isn't just about lines. Drawing is about thinking. You are, as you get more experienced, thinking about things through drawing. So at first, it's this race to acquire technical skill, to be able to create more complex images as quickly as possible, because there are so many things that we need to solve that as beginners we just cannot. We have no idea how to make our images more sophisticated, so we rush as quickly as possible to get to tone, to get to value, to get to lighting, to get to the impressive stuff. But this rushing might lead us to miss the fact that drawing is actually thinking. Now, if this sounds strange to you or maybe far-fetched, just consider the way we think about verbal language. When someone's writing, we don't think of writing as being about the letters, but then if we're drawing, we might think of drawing as being about the lines. If we think the drawing is somehow related to line, that would be the same as when someone's writing, oh, so you're just thinking about these letters, right? You're trying to get these letters there. Well, no, that's not really the goal. The goal is to be thinking about what the person is writing. And there are rules for how this writing is done. There's a grammar, there's a structure of sentences, of paragraphs, of how things fit together better. The equivalent to all of these in our visual language, in our visual communication, is drawing. Drawing is essentially the grammar of an image. When you have perspective, you need to have things look a certain way in order for it to be correct. There are rules for how we express these visual objects. So perspective, drawing, is very much the grammar of the visual language. Then in verbal language again, we have how do things fit together? How does one paragraph flow into the other? How does one sentence go into the next? Well, in drawing, this would be getting the gesture, getting the design of the image. And drawing is, again, the way to think through these things. The greater freedom that you have with your drawing ability, the more that you've internalized the grammar of perspective, of understanding structure, and understanding exactly what drawing is responsible for, the more that you can focus on these more creative things, on these more creative, bigger problems that we want to be involved in. We don't want to spend all our time in technicalities. We want to be thinking about our message that we're communicating visually. The biggest problem occurs when we don't understand the context of these things that we're trying to do. As a beginner, like I said, I devalued drawing completely because I thought of it purely as lines. I thought of it as an end result of what it gives me, and it really wasn't, I thought at the time, as sophisticated, let's say, as what a 3D software might give me, because it would give me geometry and it would give me light and all these things. Another thing that's difficult about drawing is that sometimes it doesn't look like what we imagine it should look like. Meaning that if we're expecting drawing, again, to be done by lines and we're looking for these telltale signs of what we think drawing is, sometimes we may not see those. If you're looking at a painter, for instance, and if they're working entirely in tone and in color, they may not be using any lines whatsoever. So we may fail to realize that they are still drawing, that they are still using drawing. Because drawing, like I said, is a type of thinking. And one part of this thinking is structural thinking. If you're painting something, you really need to be thinking about the three-dimensional volume that you're engaged with, the three-dimensional scene. Not just necessarily looking at things as flat shapes, which is one way of doing things, and we will talk about that, but a more experienced painter, a more knowledgeable painter, will have understanding and knowledge of how the scene is put together, which way the light is coming from, what are all the various components of this scene that they're creating, and because of that, they'll be able to have more creative freedom. They'll be able to change things if they want to. They'll be able to emphasize things, to subdue other things. They won't be relegated just to copying. They'll be able to edit and to creatively make their work. And this structural thinking, this is crucial for observational work. It's also crucial for anything that you want to do beyond that. If you're wanting to create imaginative work, if you're wanting to, let's say, place something in that scene, it is the separator when it comes to being able to do that. And drawing, again, is responsible for this structural thinking. So even when we don't see drawing the way we would expect to see it, it's still active. Like in an RPG game, it's basically a passive skill. It's always there. It's underneath the hood. And the more that you develop it, the more that you develop this ability to think structurally and three-dimensionally, the less that you have to be concerned with it, and the more that you can spend time in the higher realm of thinking, in the creative thinking. And if your goal is to be creating paintings and to be using light as a final part of your image and not just, let's say, lines, then it's crucial to be able to think about which way everything is facing in order to be able to manipulate the light or to apply it correctly. Make sure that you are following the system established in your scene, that you are rendering each and every plane as facing a certain orientation. Even when you're not seeing it, drawing is still one of the major components in every single image. And later, when some of the more technical aspects are internalized, you can really start using drawing to develop your thinking. For instance, when you're designing, drawing and sketching is one of the quickest way to come up with iterations, with multiple shapes, to just train your hand and through that, your brain, to be able to create shapes that are more appropriate, maybe more dynamic, maybe slower, whatever really fits your project. But if you're relying on fancy tools to not have to learn about drawing, to not have to train it, then really you might be sabotaging yourself, because drawing will ultimately become the fastest, quickest, most fluid way to explore things. If you're relying on 3D software, for instance, like I used to, you are then constrained to the language of 3D software, which for the most minor of changes, you now need to go in there and basically deal with images the way that a 3D software wants you to. Pushing points around or moving things, sometimes it might be very laborious to do something that's immediately in front of you, and it would just take a stroke, let's say, to change something, but 3D software requires you to go in there and have to do it in its own laborious, slow, roundabout way. My goal with the series is to provide you with context. I think that is one of the biggest things that I lacked, and I think as a beginner this is one of the most difficult things to acquire, is to understand, have a framework of what it is that you are doing exactly. I'm self-taught, and because of that I made many mistakes. I had to always just be testing things and thinking about what it is that I'm doing. A lot of things turned out to be blind alleys, or sometimes I thought I understood something and it turned out that I only was thinking of it in about 2% of its potential, which is what I did with drawing. There's a multitude of how-to tutorials out there, but really it's harder to figure out what it is that you're watching exactly, because people might show you the same things done in 50 different ways. So which one is the correct way? What should I be doing? You can see a how to draw an eye tutorial done in a variety of ways, but which one is the one that's actually useful? What are the underlying things that are most important? And which ones are just tricks, basically, that if you keep relying on those, you never really get a framework of how to do things. And it's actually harder to do things that way because you're relying on having to memorize all of these various little things instead of having a powerful underlying thread that puts everything together for you. So this series isn't really a how-to, it's not a tutorial. It's really more trying to talk about the big picture of drawing so that you can look at these various different courses and different tutorials that are out there and make a better decision of what it is exactly that you want to do and what is it that you're learning at this very moment. Does it fit into all the other things that you're wanting to be doing, or is it an isolated trick, something that is just useful in isolated situations and it really isn't feeding into a bigger picture, into a bigger framework? My goal with doing all this is to make it easier for you to hopefully navigate your learning, what it is that you're creating through your practice and all this time that you're spending, that you're investing into your art. I'm hoping that you won't make the same mistakes that I did of staying for far too long and training certain things that I really wouldn't be relying on much later on, or misinterpreting what's important and what isn't as important, so that you can focus on what's crucial and disregard everything else. Really what I wanted to do is based on this quote that you have over here. This is by Edgar Payne and it's from his book called Composition of Outdoor Painting, and he says in there, knowledge always precedes execution. It's surprising how many beginners start painting without any idea whatsoever of the mental approach. Yet in the early stages, the mental approach is far more valuable than attempting to paint right away. True, practice is equally important. Yet, knowledge always precedes execution. No one can paint better than they know how. So he's talking about painting, but really this is 100% relatable to drawing as well. And I would say probably really anything that you're trying to learn. Practicing without knowing what it is that you're doing exactly could lead to what I call rabbit holing, where you get stuck in this rabbit hole and you keep going and you keep going and you're not really sure what it's for or why you're doing it, but it was something that you weren't really very good at. It was immediate, so you start doing it. And then later on, you come out of that rabbit hole, you look around and you realize there's 1,000 more rabbit holes. And really, why did I spend so much time in that one? So it's better to first have the knowledge, the context, so then you can pick and choose how much do you go into each and everything and how long do you stay there. Otherwise, you're just grinding. You're doing the same thing over and over and over again, but you're really not being strategic. And without strategy, you're really missing out on a massive component that could help your improvement. Doing a lot of work, but not having a purpose for it or not really knowing why you're doing it could lead to understanding that that work was for naught. Like when you're drawing a portrait, let's say, and you render the eye first and then you realize the whole entire head shape is wrong. It's far more effective to spend some time in planning and strategy and then knowing that that multiplies your efforts afterwards. So what you just saw is the introduction to understanding drawing. What understanding drawing is my attempt to try and provide a framework, some context for people who are starting out, for people who have been struggling to learn, who have been trying and have put in work, but are finding that they're either not improving or they're not getting to where they thought they want to get to. I find that there's amazing courses out there right now, amazing teachers, amazing instructors. There's definitely not been a time with such amazing materials for artists. But I feel that one of the things that's really missing out there is just the ability to put these together, this big picture thinking. I disappeared from the internet for about a year, and then when I came back, I made a video about how I'd spent that year primarily on training drawing. When I came back, a lot of people then asked me, how do I get started? What should I do? And I got so many of those questions, and they were followed up by other questions that it really made it clear that we really don't know what it is that we're doing when we first start out. The questions that people are asking really indicate that we can't really understand what's important and what isn't. We don't really have any sort of framework to understand what drawing even is when we attempt to learn it, which then makes learning it be a very tricky proposition. And that's the way that I had to learn it. When I started out almost 7 years ago now, I did so many things that right now I would consider to be absolutely bound to fail, and they did fail. But there was just no other way for me to learn. I had to try things out in order to understand what drawing is, so then I would be able to train it better. And it isn't until I understood more about drawing and had a proper context and framework and understood its value that I could then train it and get to a higher level in a much shorter time. So when people ask me, what should I do? How should I get started? It's just impossible to answer that properly. Without knowing you, without knowing your goals, without knowing where you want to end up, we think of this, I think, too simply. I think that a lot of problems come from the fact that we don't really approach drawing with any sort of respect really for the training that needs to happen in order to acquire it. I think people are just looking for a simple answer. Oh, draw. Have you drawn the nose before? All right, yeah, just do the nose, man. That's totally all you need to do is just draw the nose. You don't need to worry about anything else. Just draw the nose. And I understand things are already complicated enough. We're not looking for any more complicated answers. And not only that, but we just want to do what we want to do, right? If we have a visual idea and we want to communicate that to people, I don't want to spend years on having to train before that. I just want to have a simple thing, do that, and then success. In my opinion, it just doesn't work that way though. Just doing a whole bunch of stuff, training in a simplistic way leads to grinding. And grinding is just repeating the same thing over and over and over. This is when you get told to just, well, you need mileage. You just need to go and you just need to draw more. That's absolutely fine. If you know exactly what it is that you need to be doing, then yes, absolutely. Then you need to grind. Then you need to get on it and you just need to get that practice in. But if you don't understand what you're doing, just grinding leads to nothing. It just leads to a lot of hard work that you absolutely did perform, but unfortunately not all hard work pays off. It's like moving a pile of rocks over to the left and then moving it over a bit to the right. That's a form of punishment. That's not productive work. In that case, what you're missing strategy, and strategy is your multiplier. This is the thing that makes sure that your hard work pays off, but not only that, it can also multiply it. It's leverage. So understanding drawing essentially became trying to address this lack of understanding of what it is that we're trying to do. It's not a simplistic solution by any means, but I think that with understanding, you're actually more in control of what it is that you need to do. Rather than relying on someone just telling you what to do, or just looking at something and then trying to copy that over and over, I think you're in a much better place if you understand what's required, if you understand the context of these different skills that need to come together, and you understand the visual language and what's essential, what's important in an image. I feel that you are then in better control to guide your own improvement. So understanding drawing has been my attempt to try and provide that understanding as much as possible. It's just my thinking about these problems. It ended up being 22 videos and just a few minutes under 8 hours long. Albert Einstein had this quote that everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I do think that drawing, that art, are quite the complicated things to struggle with. And I think that when we approach them too lightly, when we expect for things to go easy, when we have no idea that we need to think about these things, that we need to strategize, that we need to plan, that we need to train like an athlete to develop specific deliberate skill sets rather than just either desperately drawing and making straight lines or circles or whatever the thing is, or just drawing noses over and over, or just copying a style 10,000 times over. These things really may not be pushing us in the right direction, even though we do a lot of work. And all of this applies not just to drawing, it applies to image making, and it also doesn't really matter if you plan on drawing traditionally or digitally. It really isn't about mediums, it isn't about tools, it's about thinking. And the thinking transcends the tool. You can draw with a stick in the sand if you want, and if you know what you're doing, it's still gonna be awesome. And if you have no idea what you're doing, you can have the most advanced digital technology, software, etc. If you have no idea, then it's just not going to help. Understanding drawing is now available. It is a paid course. There's just no way that I could possibly invest the hundreds of hours that this has taken me to develop. So really, if it weren't going to be paid, it just wouldn't exist. So I know that some people are going to be annoyed at that. There's just no way that I can do this. There's bills to pay, there's rent, there's work, and I've had to put a lot of work aside in order to invest the time to do this. It's been weeks and weeks and weeks of full-time editing, writing, rewriting, cutting, expanding the material. It's really been one of the biggest things that I've done so far. It's available right now. You can find the links in the description. There's already been some people that have tried it out, and thank you very much to those of you who have. I do hope that you find far more value in this than what you invest in it. If anyone is not happy with what it is they've gotten, I'm more than happy to refund you or to make things right in whatever way. I'm happy to answer questions for you, etc. You have access to me. I would also be very grateful to those of you who have gotten it already. If you would like to leave me some feedback, send me an email, let me know what it is you think. Rate it on Gumroad, give it a rating, that would be awesome. Or write me a little review if you'd like. I'd be happy to put that on the website. Anything is appreciated, so I know how you guys are thinking about this content, because I think this is something that is experimental. It isn't really a tutorial, like I said. It's not a how-to, it's more of a roadmap. It's about thinking and understanding, and I'm curious to see what you guys think about it. With that, final things, I reference our friends at New Masters Academy a lot in the course as well. You get 15% off at checkout if you use the code VOLENCK, all one word, 15% off each and every month for your entire subscription. If you like these videos, please like them, please subscribe. It lets me know that you guys are finding value in these. And with that, it's time for me to get back to practice as well now, because it's been a while. My tablet got dusty while I was recording this thing, which is absolutely shameful. So it's about time to get back to work. Thank you guys very much for your support. Thank you for your patience with me. I look forward to hearing what you get from this. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.